Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Buy Box podcast. I'm extra excited for this one for two reasons. One, this is going to be the first one that you're all seeing in 2026, but then we also have an exceptionally special guest here, Fred Dimyan, who is the founder and CEO of POTOO Solutions, who is the sponsor of our podcast here, but also my fearless leader. And, I'm pumped for this one because many of you probably don't know that Fred has a background in this industry that is like no other. He was the former owner, one of the most successful 3P reseller businesses in the United States. And knowing that, he understands brand protection from a lens that many of us have never seen before. He also has brand side experience, having worked with organizations such as PepsiCo, Gartner Group, and many others. And so, really bringing to life the idea of helping brands maintain all of the hard work that they put into holding on to the buy box. And so, Fred, I'm excited to pick your brain today. And thank you for letting me bring you in as a guest for our podcast.
This will be fun, Jen.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can dive right in. I think one of the superpowers and advantages that you bring to us, many of us and many of the listeners here, is the eyes and ears and the ethos of a 3P seller. Maybe you can start with sharing with us, like in the mindset of what a reseller is oftentimes can win the system and game the system. And what are some of the things that might not quite be as apparent and overt in what we see coming from the other side?
I'd say first off, our sellers are sourcing items. Brands are sometimes not aware of all the opportunities, all the arbitrage opportunities, whether it's unbundling things at warehouse stores or couponing or promotions or clearance. So understanding that side intimately, and brands are sometimes unaware of the volume. So I remember one of our early meetings was with a large consumer electronics manufacturer. We met with the CEO and they were selling computer accessories. And I remember the CEO saying, "It's amazing what people do to make $5. And I said, well, the problem is not the problem. You need to understand the volume. They sold 10,000 units of this one item in the past month.
Wow.
And then the CEO was like, wait, maybe I should get into this business. So sometimes the problem is not the problem, but understanding the scale of the problem. Everybody thinks resellers are both small in their size, but there's many resellers that sell in the tens and some in the hundreds and some like Pattern, which is publicly traded, in the billions of dollars. So it's very important for them to understand what a marketplace is, that the vast majority of sales now are marketplace sales. And those marketplace sales influence 1P sales, and they also influence, obviously, the reflection to brick and mortar retail. So really understanding both sides of it. And I would say the other part, understanding the metrics that sellers need to adhere to. So all the policies, all the platform policies that are important that could put an account at risk. Selling on any online platform isn't a right, it's a privilege. And there's metrics that they need to keep by. There's warnings that platforms are regularly giving them. Some are lighter, like listing warnings. Some are obviously copyright, trademark, IP type violations that they need to be hyper aware of. So understanding the Achilles heel of the third-party sellers, understanding the behavior that helps them source items is hyper important and helps us quite a bit in the brand protection side.
Maybe going a bit deeper on the Achilles heel, how do brands sort of understand where there's challenges that a 3P seller is faced with? And I use the word sort of exploit that, but use that to the advantage of, again, holding on to more control, but understanding like this is a limitation of resellers. And how do they use that to their advantage as they're doing their planning and really showing up on marketplaces in an effective way?
Yeah, understanding that the platforms are constantly communicating with the resellers in regards to adherence of policy, understanding which policies are most important. And the general rule is the policies that are most important to the resellers are the things that most affect the consumers. So the platforms care about sales, but they obviously care about safety and also their consumers and legality. So anything that could affect an end consumer in an adverse way often puts a lot of pressure on a third party seller. So think things like expiration dates, how items are stored or how items are shipped or labeling. Anything that could affect a consumer affects the reseller greatly. So manufacturers need to understand that, but they also need to know where to lean in. There's certain things that are smaller violations, like a listing violations. There's things like counterfeit that are the most massive of violations on the platform. So when brands look at it, they should look at it in regards to the protection of their consumer, and then reverse engineer into how we could communicate with the platforms to affect the resellers that may be affecting those consumers.
So fascinating and a very good reminder in thinking about the impact to the end consumer. And oftentimes, many of these policies are sort of structured around protecting that consumer safety, but also experience. I'm curious to get your views. And not all platforms are created equal, and marketplaces are created equal. As you've seen the evolution of the Amazons of the world, eBays of the world, maybe some more local, marketplaces around the world where the common denominator is access, the ability for any reseller to have access, but the rules of engagement might be nuanced. What have you seen and tips across where you're seeing the changes from back when you had your business to, fast forward to today's landscape?
Many more people are aware of the marketplace. I would say what's interesting to me is the more trusted a platform is, the less consumers think there might be bad behavior on that platform. So think of the Amazons of the world or Walmart, where they have great return policies, they take care of their customers. Some people do not know they're buying from a third party seller in certain cases because, as the title of the podcast goes, people win the buy box typically capture 80+% of the sales. People just click buy it now. They often don't even know who they purchase it from. And then on more trusted platforms, they make the assumption that this is a genuine item with no issues, shipped directly by the Amazons or Walmarts of the world. But the reality is it's often sourced by a third party seller, maybe actually shipped by Walmart fulfillment or Amazon fulfillment, where somebody might buy on an eBay and they might check the item, or Temu and check the item much differently than if they purchase the same item on a more trusted platform. And sometimes consumers are often buying a brand they haven't purchased before, an item they haven't purchased before. So what does that mean? They may not know that there might be degradation in the product due to the third party seller. So think of something that has an expiration date or loses efficacy. They might not know that. They might just think it's related to the product. So in addition to the third party sellers affecting the brand in various different ways, they affect the reviews quite a bit. And think of yourself as a consumer, Jen. You're buying something at a retail store. It has 2.5 star reviews because everybody looks at Amazon now as a reflection point. You might view that item differently than if it had 4.5 star reviews. But those reviews might be related to the third party seller and might be related to shipping and other things where the brand loses control.
Oh, I rely 100% on what others are saying. And I never fact check where those are driven from
Mm.
or which exact seller was, making the experience kind of come to life. If we take a look at from a brand perspective and thinking about clients that we have in our arsenal that you've come across over the 12 years that POTOO has
Mm.
been in the industry, what are some of the things that the best brands that have a level of buy box ownership, control across the marketplaces, manage disruption in a really effective way? Because there will always be disruption. It'll never be smooth sailings. That's just not inherent in digital. The world is a digital commerce. But what are some of those things that you've seen over time that are consistent strategies that you can share, with the community here?
Yeah, I say part of it's strategy, but part of it is also who's completely accountable for a brand. Obviously the CEO or an executive might be liable, but where you have it more segmented and siloed, where somebody's responsible for selling the brand to wholesalers, and you're responsible for online, and somebody's responsible for retail, and they're incented differently, they might have less. Let's call it fortitude to be able to cut off where we find disruption. But where there's somebody singularly responsible, or they have I'm going to call it fortitude because I could think of a couple of brands we work with where they knew they were going to have to take a short-term hit to clean up the marketplace, but it was going to be long-term positive. So I would say less so on the practices. I think the practices are pretty standard. Obviously, we have better practices and better data and industry-leading experience, but that still doesn't give us the ability to be in there as a brand and cut off distributors or cut off retailers that may be affecting or change promotional policies. We can inform them of that. But part of what is great about POTOO's data, we get the volume of it because, as I said earlier, the problem is not the problem, but the volume is the problem. If you find out a distributor might be leaking to a third party seller on a marketplace. You may suspect that, and brands often do already know this information, but they don't know the magnitude of it. Is it 1% of the sales to the distributor, or is it 90%? Those are two totally different action points. So arming with the data, but I would say the best practice is being willing to limit distribution where they find it's not adding value to the brand. I would say another practice, often brands, and this goes back to brick and mortar days, the more people they sell to, the wider their footprint. That's the general theme. I'm going to sell to 100 people. My footprint's going to be 10 times as wide as if I sell to 10 people. Online, it's very different. You could sell to 100 people, but they might not add any of your footprint. They are they are vertically underneath the other sellers. So they're not adding any value. They're not adding any other listings. And maybe I'll leave you with one example. So think of two different marketplaces, Amazon and Walmart. If there's 10 people selling the same item on Amazon, there's still one singular listing and there's price pressure. Simple supply and demand. If there's 10 people selling the item on eBay, there's 10 different listings. They don't bundle the listings underneath each other. So you actually increase your footprint on platforms like that, similar to brick and mortar, but you actually increase price pressure and don't increase your footprint on platforms like Amazon.
It's such an interesting orientation. I don't think I've ever thought about, from a shopper lens, same number of variations, but how it shows up
Mhm.
and what type of pressure is it applying and impact to the brand. In chats that we've had so far with guests, there's this underlying dynamic of at some point where the challenge feels very great. Lots of folks acting on your behalf of the brand, regardless of what platform it is. And especially for established brands that have wide distribution, pricing might feel a bit out of control, pricing sole discretion of the retailer. And this sense of, what, there's really not anything we can do. This is just how it is. I know for me, the starting point in any of my journeys, it's actually how we connected way back in my J&J days with Measure. Just start with measuring to understand the universe as like a step forward and not, which might be overwhelming, but knowing what's out there is like step number one. But I'm curious from your lens, like what have you seen and advised on like actionable steps that are better than sort of accepting the challenge and
Yeah,
crazy
that
dynamic that can exist out there?
it is one of the greatest pushbacks we got initially and still often get, where this is just a marketplace. This is the nature of the new online world. And there's nothing I could do. Obviously, companies like POTOO exist and we're successful at it because clearly there is something you could do. But I would almost ask the inverse of the question. You're aware there's an issue and you're a large publicly traded brand. Are you going to do nothing to not even monitor or make some efforts in there? So think in terms of the consumers we brought up previously. Do your consumers of your product not want to see you are monitoring and policing the marketplaces in which you're being sold? So I, as a consumer, could get a genuine item. So you have to put in some level of effort. Is the problem completely solvable? The answer is no. That doesn't mean you can't move the needle greatly. It doesn't mean you can't remove 90 some odd percent of disruption. It doesn't mean Amazon or Walmart or eBay are going to shut off all resellers. But it does mean that we can move the needle quite a bit and put some good faith efforts in, identify sources of leaks, and then shut them down. So I would almost ask it for a consumer. If you're the consumer of your own products as the brand, would you not want to see your brand is taking efforts, even if those efforts aren't 100% successful, taking the greatest efforts they can to monitor and police to ensure you're getting a genuine item, especially in areas and typically the brands, as you brought up, Jen, they're mass distributed brands. They're high value brands, high quality brands. They're premium brands. So the consumers expect that. Those are not bargain basement, online only brands that we're dealing with. They're large, well-known retail brands, and they do need to take efforts. And the efforts do end up being successful. Is the problem solved? It's a very aggressive treatment that could be highly successful. If the problem could be solved, there wouldn't be this problem, right? Somebody would have solved it, and it would be one and done. But it is an aggressive treatment. It's much like dieting or exercising. Could I go once and have it done? No, it needs to be continual, and there's always some level of improvement. But you can move the needle quite a bit. So across, as you're well aware, across our portfolio of clients, we move over 80 something percent of the disruption on the marketplace, quite a bit, and it often leads to a lot of great secondary effects. Primary effect being protecting the consumer. Secondary effects, obviously, normalizing the marketplace. You know who's selling your items. You know they're genuine, and the reviews end up being a little higher.
I'm obviously a subscriber here to that.
Okay.
So much so, I just jumped camp to the other
Mhm.
side of the fence and become an evangelist to protecting brands. If I think about maybe one more, double click into your mindset of the reseller. You spoke a little bit about sourcing and really understanding of the magnitude of what the problem is, and the creativity that can exist in getting inventory. One other very pervasive dynamic, especially when we think about global audiences and cross border movement of inventory and policies. How, from a reseller perspective, what are some of the kind of the tricks of the trade that you've seen, and how that happens that can give brands a little bit of an insider lens of how easy this can be to have inventory move from one part of the ocean
Mhm.
across the pond to the other? So I think it's a fascinating experience that you have in this particular area.
Yeah. I'll start with the incentive, right? So what could be the possible reward of a third party seller figuring out where to have a low cost source of very high volume items. Resellers could make millions or tens of millions of dollars if they find whole opportunity. It could be a cross border opportunity, it could be a retail arbitrage opportunity. They can make quite a bit. Typically, the person at the brand is not going to be incented millions or tens of millions of dollars for solving the problem. So the incentive is lopsided. Resellers could be extremely successful. In doing so, it could be extremely lucrative. It's very hard for a brand. It's very hard for anybody to see a pattern in one. So part of the benefit of companies like POTOO, we could see a pattern. We have 550 some odd brands we work with. Like, you can't not see a pattern in 550. But if you're dealing with one individual brand, you don't see those issues where you see commonality. So there's 6 million some odd sellers, let's say on Amazon. There's more if you add the other marketplaces, but there's not 6 million sources of product. There's less than that. So if we could find a pattern of behavior with the third party resellers, there's often other ones that take that same pattern. And we could do this across brands. So also, if we identify a seller across one distributor or one source, we have effectively identified them across every brand they come across. And sometimes they actually give us information in regards to their sourcing. Brands need to be aware this is being done, but they also need to begin to see patterns in that behavior. And sometimes it's self-inflicted wounds where you're clearing out in one country, it's being discounted or promoted in one country and it's not in another country. When I say the sellers are sophisticated, they're sometimes currency traders where
Hmm.
one currency is evaluating, or and it's being sold in a different marketplace, and they could import it, sometimes getting around tariffs. Large brands are typically not going to try to get around tariffs, but third party sellers selling and shipping small bits of inventory could often get around those tariffs, and often price it sometimes less expensive than the brand can because of that. So just being aware of that level of behavior. And it's a lot of the brands we deal with are global. Are they discounting in one marketplace? Is it being cleared out? Are there tax implications in different marketplaces? And if somebody were really savvy and could be very highly rewarded, could they blow a hole through that? And then the complexity of kind of the self-inflicted wound where, okay, I found that somebody in Italy is clearing this out for my brand and it's making its way to the UK. Great. The person in Italy is happy. The person in UK may or may not have the ability to stop them. The more a brand really wants to be concerned about the overall health of a brand, regardless of region, regardless of distribution source, the healthier that brand could become.
Yeah, we've had several guests that also speak to the dynamic. Data can empower the right conversations, but it has to cut across teams to open up and use kind of the facts to help just shine a light to the dynamic, which was such an important part of moving to the side of cleanup as well. Now, maybe if you could leave us with one last, for any guests that are out there, if you had to leave a couple of tips of advice, and don't forget to dot, dot, dot. Well, what would those words of advice be for us?
I would say something, this might be repetitive to what I said before, but look at your brand in the eyes of the consumer. What do you hope, if you were a consumer of a brand, that you would do? You would protect your consumer. I would say, another thing is pricing. As what we do succeeds, pricing normalizes. You know who's selling it. You know the price it's selling for. As a consumer, I'm relaxed when it's one price in the brick and mortar, another price online, another price at another online retailer. That's really confusing to me. And I might walk away from that brand just because there's a lack of consistency in that. Think of the Apples of the world or the Tiffany's, the places that rarely discount, it gives a comfort level to a consumer. So you want to make sure you're getting a genuine item. You'd want some level of price consistency across marketplaces. And that's the effect of us policing online marketplaces. It just normalizes a marketplace. It turns it into the 1990s. I know who I'm selling to. I know what they're selling it for. My life becomes easier. And in effect, that's what we do. We just normalize online platforms to what they should be and what the brand wants them to be.
I can attest to that. Removing the decision fatigue and lack of clarity for any consumer is always going to be a win. So it's great word of advice and of clarity and consistency in the experience for the consumer. Well, thank you so much, Fred, for letting me steal some of your time today and for you sharing your experiences and perspective here with all of our community members. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.